Am I a bad father for favoring my daughter over my stepson? I truly believe I'm not wrong, but since many people think I am, I came to seek a neutral perspective. So, I had my daughter Olivia with my then boyfriend Martine when we were 17. We had finished high school a couple of months earlier, and we decided to keep the baby against our family's wishes. We worked and studied a degree at the same time, and we managed to raise Olivia, and she never lacked food, but she did miss out on many things her classmates had. Martine and I broke up, but we remained friends, and have kept a good co-parenting relationship ever since. Now I finally graduated, got a good job, was able to buy my own house, and I married my husband Caleb 4 years ago after dating for 3. He was divorced and has a son, Ian, from his previous marriage, with whom I don't have a good relationship. Not because we fight or anything like that, but because we rarely see each other. He only spends a few days a week with me, and I work long hours. The rest of the time, I mostly spend with my daughter, my husband, or my friends. From the start, I made it clear that Olivia would always be my priority, no matter what. And he said the same about his son. Olivia and my husband have a cordial relationship, but they've never gotten very close. My daughter is quite reserved, so it's normal that they're not that close. When Olivia was 12, Martine and I decided to save money in an account to buy our daughter an apartment. It's almost impossible to have an apartment or a house at a young age, especially in Latin America. So we wanted her to have a safe place since we had the money. But since she's always been stubborn and proud, we had the idea to buy a fairly large apartment that was completely run down, needing a major renovation and totally empty. And the apartment is in the city center. We bought it when she was 14 and told her the apartment was in her name and she could access it once she started university. But we told her she'd have to work to pay for the renovation and furniture. She was more than happy with this and started working shortly after. She saved a lot of money, and I arranged the renovations while she was in her last year of high school. She also bought the furniture, and the apartment turned out really nice. She moved in at the beginning of the month to start university. My husband really liked this. He said he wanted to do the same for his son, but wanted to buy him an apartment in good condition and fully furnished. He said he had already talked to his ex and her husband, and they had agreed to contribute. Caleb asked me to put some money into his savings, but I told him I couldn't, and I gave him my reasons. Basically, my mom has cancer, and I'm the only one of my siblings who can afford to pay for her treatments. Not only that, but Martine and I have decided to cover all of Olivia's expenses and give her money every month. We want her to not only focus primarily on university, but also make friends and adapt to her new life in a big city. Caleb got pretty mad at me. He told me it wasn't fair that I wasn't contributing since I'm Ian's stepmother and need to step up, and that maybe I should let Olivia get a job since she's about to turn 18. I got pretty upset about that and told him that only Martine and I would decide how to raise Olivia and what to give her, not him. And I reminded him that I had always told him my daughter comes first. I told him he was delusional if he thought I was going to leave my daughter on her own when she's not even legally an adult just so he could buy his son an apartment. No matter what, she will always come first. And that's how things are supposed to be. And I offer to help him in the future to buy furniture or pay bills. But at the moment, I can't help. He told me I was favoring my daughter, then left and hasn't spoken to me since. And I refuse to apologize when I believe I haven't done anything wrong. Now, I know my husband doesn't make much money. I earn much more than he does. And I know his ex and her husband don't earn much either. So if I don't help, they'll never be able to buy an apartment for him. But right now, I don't have another option. Some of my friends told me that once you marry someone with a child, you also become responsible for that child, and that I should treat him the same way I treat my daughter. Honestly, I think that's bullshit. Ian has a mother and a father, and I don't think he ever expected me to be a parental figure for him or to treat him with the same love as I treat my daughter. I think those kinds of things can't be forced. They should happen naturally. And since we've barely spent any time together, it hasn't happened. Besides, I could never love my stepson as much as I love my daughter. I could never treat them equally. My daughter will always come first, above everything else. I care about my stepson, but he's just not my child. Also, I feel like it's pretty unfair because he doesn't treat my daughter like he treats his son, and I don't expect him to. Since then, Caleb has been sleeping on the couch. We barely speak, and the tension at home is unbearable. Olivia has noticed, And although she doesn't say anything directly, I've seen her quieter lately, as if she's afraid something will break. She doesn't know the full argument, but she suspects. And I find myself in that middle ground between pride and doubt. Am I really being unfair? Should I give in, even if it doesn't feel right? Is it worth sacrificing so much to maintain a forced peace? Sometimes I wonder if this marriage has a future. I can't imagine a life where I have to hide how much I love my daughter or pretend that my stepson and I have a connection that doesn't exist. And it's not that I don't want it to exist. It just hasn't happened. I can't force it. And the strangest thing is that I feel like it's not even about the apartment. I feel like Caleb is trying to balance a scale that was never even to begin with. Olivia and I went through hell together. I raised her on my own, with Martine as an ally, yes, but many times crying silently while studying at midnight or when I couldn't afford to buy her a gift. Ian, on the other hand, has always had a broader support system. And maybe he doesn't have luxuries, but he has a stable home with his mother, and he's never felt the kind of abandonment or lack that Olivia experienced. I don't know what will happen tomorrow. I don't know if Caleb will talk to me. I don't know if this crack will close or grow wider. But I do know I'm not going to stop being the mother I've been to my daughter. And as I write this, I realize the story isn't over yet. It's far from it. Since that night Caleb decided not to sleep in our bed anymore, the atmosphere at home has become a minefield. Any word, any gesture, seemed to have the power to spark a new argument. Olivia noticed more than I thought. One day she asked me, with that mix of caution and curiosity that defines her so well, if Caleb was mad at me. I didn't know what to say without sounding like a betrayal or a lie. I just told her that adults also go through difficult times, but that she shouldn't carry that burden. She looked at me silently, nodded, and went back to her room without saying anything else. What's hardest for me isn't the conflict, but the emotional distance that has grown between Caleb and me. It's like every conversation is a formality, like there's nothing left of the man I married. And not because I don't love him anymore, but because I feel like we're seeing two completely different realities. He talks about fairness, about equality, about shared roles. But I can't help thinking that behind his words is a need for me to sacrifice part of who I am to fulfill an idealized idea of family. One time I tried to reach out. I made the dinner he liked, lit some candles, and waited for him to come home from work. He arrived late, barely greeted me, and after seeing the table, sighed without enthusiasm. He sat down, ate in silence, and then went to the couch. That night I cried, not from sadness, but from frustration, because I felt like I was fighting alone again. Meanwhile, Olivia has blossomed in her new university stage. Her eyes light up when she talks about classes, new friends, the ideas she wants to explore. I'm proud to see her grow with such strength, and it hurts that I can't share that pride with someone who should be happy for her too. Caleb doesn't show any enthusiasm for her achievements. I think deep down, it bothers him that Olivia has something Ian doesn't. The other day, I overheard Caleb talking to his ex-wife on the phone. He said he was doing everything he could, but that I wasn't supporting him, that I refused to integrate into the family the way a married woman is supposed to. It hurt to hear him talk like that. What does supposed to even mean? Who sets those rules? Because if being a wife means erasing myself, then maybe I don't want to be one. I haven't stopped thinking about how we got to this point. I remember the early months with Caleb, how we laughed at silly things, how he held my hand in supermarkets for no reason, how he looked at me when he thought I wasn't noticing. Where did all that go? I wonder if it was time, routine, or simply that we were never meant to last beyond the initial illusion. Ian still comes a few days a week. He's a good kid, quiet, very polite. But there's an invisible barrier between us. I couldn't say if it's mine or his, maybe both. I try to include him in conversations, ask him questions about school, but his answers are always brief, measured, as if he's afraid to say something wrong, or as if he simply doesn't want to connect. Sometimes I feel guilty about that, but I also believe you can't force a bond just because a piece of paper says so. We're not a family just because we share a house a few days a week. And most importantly, I'm not a bad person for not feeling love for him. Affection isn't automatic. It's built. It's nurtured. And in this case, there hasn't been a real chance to do that. Martine, on the other hand, has been a pillar. Despite our past differences, he's always been there for Olivia. He doesn't understand Caleb's reaction either. He told me that what probably bothers Caleb isn't the apartment, but the fact that Olivia has an emotional structure that Ian doesn't. And maybe he's right, because even though our life was hard, our daughter grew up with emotional stability, with affection, with support, not with luxuries, but with presence. A few days ago, Caleb suggested we go to couples therapy. It surprised me, not because I hadn't considered it, but because I never imagined he would be the one to suggest it first. I agreed, although I'm not sure if I did it out of hope or inertia. I want to believe something can still be saved, but I'm also afraid to discover that maybe the best thing would be to separate. In the first session, the therapist asked us to talk about our expectations. Caleb said he wanted a united family, with no favoritism. He said he felt excluded, that sometimes he felt like he was just a guest in my life. I responded that I had never hidden the fact that Olivia would be my priority, and that I always hoped we'd build a family with our own rules, not by copying someone else's mold. It was a tough conversation, but for the first time in weeks, we talked without yelling, without sarcasm, without doors slamming. We left the office in silence, but I felt a sort of relief, as if at least we had stopped pretending everything was fine. That night, Olivia hugged me without saying a word. Sometimes I think children know more than we say, that they perceive the invisible, that they understand even what isn't expressed. Her hug comforted me more than any words. The next morning, Caleb made coffee for both of us. We didn't talk, but it was a gesture, a small one, yes, but meaningful. It reminded me that despite everything, we're still here, together, trying. And even though I still don't know how all this is going to end, for now, it's enough to know that there's still room to try. It's been several weeks since the first therapy session, and although the atmosphere at home no longer feels like a bomb about to explode, there's a kind of silent emptiness that floats between us. It's not a truce, nor a reconciliation, but a fragile pause that no one dares to break. Caleb and I have continued going to therapy, and although we've learned to listen to each other a bit more, not everything has improved. Sometimes I feel like we're peeling away layers of old paint without knowing if there's anything underneath worth keeping. In the third session, the therapist asked us to make a list of the things that made us feel valued. Caleb spoke of concrete gestures, sharing dinners, being involved in family decisions, feeling considered. I spoke of respect, of space, of not having every choice I make for Olivia questioned. The tension came back when I mentioned that as long as he insisted on demanding identical treatment between Ian and Olivia, we weren't going to move forward. Caleb didn't understand, or didn't want to. He said it wasn't about competition, but about recognizing that both kids deserve the same opportunities. I replied that fairness is one thing, and ignoring the stories that shape us is another. Olivia is the result of years of struggle, of mistakes, of lessons. I can't just level that out as if it were a blank sheet of paper. The topic of the apartment came up again. He said that every time he walked into that place, he felt like it was a monument to inequality. That Ian noticed it, even if he didn't say anything. And I wondered in silence if the real problem was the constant comparison. Why couldn't he see that accomplishment as something good, even if it didn't come from him? Ian has been quieter than usual. When he comes over, he locks himself in his room and barely responds to my attempts at conversation. I don't blame him. He must sense the strange atmosphere, the avoiding glances, the forced silences. One afternoon, while Olivia and I were cooking, she asked me if she had done something to make her stepfather so serious. I told her no, that adults sometimes carry problems we don't know how to handle. She smiled at me without really believing it and kept mixing the cake batter. That same night, Caleb confronted me. He said Olivia avoided him, that she didn't make any effort to include him. I reminded him, patiently, that she has never been outgoing, that she has always needed time to open up. But he insisted that if there was no reciprocity, then he couldn't keep pretending we were a family. And there, something inside me broke. I asked him if he had ever considered that he also needed to make an effort to connect with Olivia, not just wait for her to make the first move. He didn't answer. He went to bed, without saying another word. Martine has been more present since all this began. He calls me almost daily, asks about Olivia, about my mom, about me. He offers help, listens without judging. Sometimes, in the middle of those talks, I catch myself wishing for a simpler life, less tangled. I wonder what would have happened if things had been different between us. If maybe, at another time, we would have had a real chance to work. It's not love that I feel, but a longing for the familiar, for the reliable. Olivia, for her part, has taken refuge in her independence. Her new home, though modest, has become her sanctuary. She sends me photos of the paintings she's hanging, of the plants she lovingly cares for. I see her happier, more confident, but also more distant. And not in a bad way, but in that way children begin to carve their own path. It hurts and fills me with joy at the same time. The eternal paradox of motherhood. One night, while the three of us, Caleb, Ian, and I, were having dinner in an attempt to regain some sense of normalcy, Ian asked me what I liked most about Olivia. I hesitated before answering, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I was afraid it would sound like a disguised comparison. In the end, I told him I admired her bravery, her ability to keep going despite the circumstances. Ian looked down, and Caleb pressed his lips together. The rest of dinner passed in silence. The next day, I found a note in the kitchen. It was from Ian. He said he understood that Olivia and I had a special bond, and that he wasn't trying to replace that, but that sometimes he felt like a guest in someone else's house. It hurt more than I expected, because even though I always knew we weren't close, I never wanted him to feel left out. I responded with another note, telling him that while affection doesn't grow overnight, I was willing to keep trying, if he wanted to as well. I don't know what effect the note had. He hasn't said anything about it, but since then, he seemed a bit more open. He stayed a little longer in the living room watching TV with me, even told me something that happened at school. It was a small step, but a genuine one. Caleb noticed, and although he didn't say anything directly, that night he thanked me for talking to Ian. It was the first time in a long while that he thanked me for something. Sometimes I wonder if we're meant to rebuild ourselves, or if we're just postponing the inevitable. There are moments when I look at him and remember why I fell in love with him. But there are also moments when I can't help but feel that we're two people trying to save a sinking ship. And meanwhile, life goes on. The obligations, work shifts, hospital visits to see my mom, messages from Olivia, Ian silences. Everything keeps turning, even if I sometimes feel stuck at this point. I know there's still more of this story to tell. What I don't know is where it will lead us. The routine has settled again like a thick layer covering everything. Caleb and I continue to share spaces, but we do so from a calculated distance. We talk, yes, but like two people who owe each other logistical explanations, not emotions. We don't argue like before, but we don't laugh either. Everything seems measured, as if any deviation from the script could trigger another collapse. In therapy, we've been asked to explore our expectations for the future. Caleb said he wanted a family where everyone feels included, without favoritism or emotional hierarchies. I said I wanted peace, not a superficial peace, but the kind of serenity that comes when every member feels free to be themselves without fear of judgment. There were no agreements, but also no reproaches. It was a calmer session than the others, although the questions still lingered unanswered. Olivia, meanwhile, is completely absorbed in her university life. I barely see her during the week, and when we talk by video call, her face shows both excitement and exhaustion. University demands a lot from her, but it also makes her happy. She tells me about her classes, the books she's reading, the solitary walks she takes in the park near her building. Sometimes I just listen and realize how much she's changed. She's no longer the little girl who depended on me for everything. She's a young woman making her own decisions, facing life with the same determination she had when she learned to ride a bike without help. I've started writing in a notebook, not exactly a diary, but a kind of emotional journal. It helps me organize my thoughts, to understand myself. There are days when I realize that the sadness doesn't only come from Caleb, but from the accumulation of responsibilities I carry on my shoulders. Work, my mother, Olivia, Ian, the marriage. Everything feels heavier than it should. My mother has had a relapse. The treatment is weakening her, and every visit to the hospital leaves me with a mix of helplessness and anger. Sometimes, while I watch her sleep, I catch myself wishing time would stop, that it wouldn't move toward the inevitable. She, however, remains strong. She smiles at me even when she can barely keep her eyes open. She asks me to take care of myself, to not forget about me in the middle of all this chaos. And that phrase haunts me. Because, honestly, I lost sight of myself a long time ago. Ian has started spending more time in the living room. He sits to watch movies with me, asks questions about what I'm cooking, even helps set the table without being asked. We haven't had deep conversations, but the small gestures have begun to draw a new dynamic between us. I wouldn't say we've grown emotionally closer, but there's definitely a warmer courtesy now, a kind of respect that didn't exist before. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to take him with me to the supermarket. It was something simple, but I saw it as an opportunity to be alone and talk without tension. During the ride, he told me there's a group at his school that does volunteer work on weekends, and that he'd like to join. I was happy to hear about his interest. I offered to help him coordinate the schedule with his mother. He smiled at me. It was a shy smile, but genuine. In that moment, I felt that maybe, just maybe, we could find common ground. That same night, Caleb and I spoke briefly. I told him about the supermarket trip, about the volunteer work, about how well Ian had behaved. He seemed surprised. He said he didn't know Ian had those interests. And then another crack became visible. Caleb doesn't know his son as well as he thinks. And maybe that's why it's so hard for him to accept that Olivia and I have a strong bond. Because deep down, he himself longs for a deeper connection with Ian. At work, things have become more demanding. A major project is coming, and I've had to take on additional responsibilities. I spend many hours away from home, and when I return, I barely have the energy to face the pending issues. Still, I try to keep the balance, cooking, cleaning, visiting my mother, answering Olivia's messages. Exhaustion has become part of the landscape. Martine offered to take care of all of Olivia's expenses for the next 2 months, so I could focus on other priorities. I appreciated the gesture, though I felt a pang of shame. It's hard for me to accept help, even from someone so close. But I also recognize that I need to lighten the load. I accepted, for now. In one of our latest therapy sessions, the psychologist asked us to describe the happiest moment in our relationship. I talked about a short trip to the beach, back when we were still dating. Caleb remembered a dinner at home, a night when Ian and Olivia laughed together about something silly. I was surprised he chose a memory where both kids were present. It made me think that, in his own way, he wants things to work too, even if he doesn't know how to make that happen. One early morning, a nightmare woke me up. I dreamed that Olivia disappeared, and no one believed me when I said something was wrong. I sat up in bed, drenched in sweat. Caleb was still asleep in the other room. I went to the kitchen, drank some water, and sat in the dark. In those silent moments, when everything is paused, that's when the loneliness weighs the most. Because even surrounded by people, I feel alone, as if everything depends solely on me. I've started thinking about changing a few things. Not drastic decisions, but adjustments. Maybe reducing my work hours, finding some space for myself, picking up an activity I enjoy again. I like painting, though I haven't done it in years. Maybe I should start again. Not for anyone else, but for me. Because if I keep putting myself off, I'm going to disappear into this woman who only reacts to the needs of others. For now, I keep going, step by step. Some nights, I feel on the verge of collapse. Others, I find myself laughing with Ian at something on TV. There are days when Caleb looks at me like he wants to talk but stays silent. I don't know if he's waiting for me to break the ice, or if he's simply learned to settle. The only thing I know is that the story is still being written. There are still pages left to fill. And even if I don't know what's coming, at least I'm sure I don't want to live in fear of being who I am. Mornings have become a sort of silent truce. We wake before the alarm goes off, each in our own corner, avoiding stepping into the other space. Caleb and I share breakfast without exchanging too many words, while Ian flips through a magazine or checks his phone. Everything moves with clockwork precision. Coffee machine on, toast ready, dishes washed before leaving. A routine that, while it offers some stability, also holds a coldness that's becoming harder and harder to ignore. I can't help but look back. Sometimes, on the way to work, I remember those first weeks after the wedding. There was a different energy then, an innocent hope that effort alone would be enough to unite our worlds. I never imagined that the weight of our different histories would be so heavy, or that the past would be a permanent guest, occupying the spaces where there should have been closeness. Olivia came home for the weekend. She arrived with a light backpack and a tired smile. She hugged me longer than usual. In the kitchen, while we made tea, she confessed that she felt a little overwhelmed, not by her studies, but by the pressure to keep everything balanced. I saw myself in her. I told her it wasn't necessary to have everything under control, that sometimes letting go is braver than holding on. She looked at me in silence and, for the first time, asked me if I was happy. I didn't know what to say. During her visit, Caleb was kind but distant. He tried to start a conversation with her, though his efforts were awkward. Olivia responded politely, without showing much interest. It hurt to see that coldness, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to ruin her rest with conflicts that don't belong to her. That night, while Olivia slept in her old room, Caleb and I talked. He asked me if I ever believed we could build a real family. I told him I did, that I wanted it, but that I also knew you can't force an emotional structure just because you live under the same roof. That I had tried to create space, but didn't always feel the same effort from him. He accused me of giving up too soon, of protecting Olivia so much that I left no room for anyone else. I stayed silent, because in part he was right, but I also knew I had given the best of myself, within my limits. On Sunday afternoon, Olivia left. She left a note on the table. I love you. Don't forget to think about yourself too. I read it while washing the dishes, and I almost dropped a glass. I sat down on the kitchen floor and cried, not out of sadness, but because of the lump in my throat I had been ignoring for days. Because sometimes all it takes is one sentence to release everything we've been holding back. That same week, the hospital called to tell me my mother needed prolonged hospitalization. Her condition had worsened. I took 2 days off to be with her. I slept on a chair beside her bed, helped her eat, read her favorite novels to her in a low voice. Even in her weakness, she stroked my hair and told me not to worry about her, that she would fight as long as she could. There was more strength in her eyes than in mine. I came home with a tired soul and a body on the edge. Ian had left a drawing on the dining table. It was a cartoon of the 4 of us. Him, Olivia, Caleb, and me, all smiling, with a bright sun in the background and a huge tree over our heads. It moved me more than I expected. Sometimes, children express with images what they can't put into words. I hung the drawing on the fridge without saying anything, but I made sure he saw it. When he noticed, he smiled shyly and went about his business. It was a small moment, but a genuine one. In therapy, we were asked to do an activity, write a letter to the other person without delivering it. Just write, without filters, without trying to find the right way. I did it. I cried while writing. I talked about my fears, the broken expectations, the exhaustion eating away at me. I thanked him for the good things, and I called out the things that hurt. I don't know if he'll ever read it, but at least I did. And that helped me understand that I still feel things, even if they're wrapped in disappointment. Caleb told me he wrote his too, that it was hard, that he had to start 3 times because he didn't know where to begin. He said that, in the end, he realized he had been holding onto resentment without naming it, that he had expected understanding without offering it. It was the first honest conversation we'd had in a long time. Since then, we've started sharing some spaces with less tension, watching a movie together, eating dinner in silence, but without rush, walking with Ian to the park. It's not much, but at least there's willingness. And willingness, in the midst of so much wear and tear, is a small miracle. One night, while watering the plants on the balcony, I stared at the sky. I thought about my mother, about Olivia, about this family in progress that still hasn't found its shape. I thought about who I was before all of this, about who I am now. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for asking myself that. I've started leaving notes in my own notebook, things I like, songs that lift me up, phrases that make me laugh. I'm making an effort not to become the shadow of who I once was, to not forget that beyond being a mother, a wife, a daughter, and a stepmother, I'm also a woman with dreams, with desires, with a story of her own. I don't know what next month will bring. There are days when I think we can rebuild, others when I think maybe we're just prolonging the inevitable. But at least now there's more clarity, more truth. And even though that doesn't guarantee a happy ending, it does allow whatever comes next, whatever it may be, to have meaning. It was a mild autumn morning when I realized that, for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the weight of silence. The house was quiet, not because of a lack of noise, but because that invisible tension that used to cover everything was gone. Caleb was making coffee in the kitchen. Ian was flipping through a book on the couch. And I simply observed. For a few seconds, I felt as if time had paused, giving me a moment to think clearly. That same week, we had our final therapy session. It wasn't dramatic, nor were there any shocking revelations. It was more of a calm, almost inevitable ending. The therapist thanked us for our willingness and, at the end, asked if we thought we had found what we came looking for. Caleb and I looked at each other without speaking. I nodded. He did the same, with a mix of relief and resignation. That night, at home, we made a decision. Sitting in the living room, without raising our voices, we said everything that was left to say. There were no reproaches, only truths that, after being held in for so long, no longer hurt. I told him I had loved him sincerely, that I truly hoped he'd find peace. He replied that he had always admired my strength, though he often didn't know how to support me. We agreed to separate. The conversation with Ian was harder. Caleb and I explained together that we were going to live in different houses, but that we would still be part of his life. He looked at me with sad eyes and asked if he wouldn't be drawing cartoons of the four of us anymore. I told him he could keep drawing them if he wanted to. That memories don't disappear just because circumstances change. He hugged me tightly. It was the first time he came to me on his own. With Olivia, it was different. She looked at me silently when I told her. Then she said, "I already knew. I just didn't want to say it before you did." Her maturity moved me. She offered to help me with the move, even though I wasn't sure yet where I'd be going. The days that followed were a mix of nostalgia and relief. I packed my things slowly, giving myself space to close each chapter. I found photos I had forgotten, unsent letters, even the first grocery list we ever made together. I cried silently as I boxed it all up, but not from pain, rather from the natural process of letting go. Caleb and I signed the papers calmly. We agreed on everything peacefully. I moved into a small apartment not far away, decorated to my taste, with plants and big windows. It was mine, and more importantly, it was a reflection of a new chapter, not a replica of the past. Over time, my relationship with Ian found its own rhythm. We still see each other now and then. Sometimes we cook together, other times we just walk through the park. We're not a traditional family, but we built something genuine, something based not on obligation, but on mutual respect. Olivia finished her first year of university with honors. Martine and I attended the ceremony together. Watching her receive her award made me feel that everything, absolutely everything, had been worth it. Her hug was long and warm, full of pride. In that moment, I understood that I had fulfilled my role, that I had guided my daughter to the point where she could fly on her own. My mother passed away shortly after. It was peaceful, without suffering. In her final days, she held my hand and told me she was proud of me, that she had raised a woman capable of facing the world with strength. I cried beside her not because of the goodbye, but because of the love she never stopped giving me. After the funeral, I took a few days for myself. I traveled to a quiet place, with no signal, no plans. I walked along silent trails, wrote in my notebook, and slept to the sound of rain. I rediscovered myself, not as a mother, a wife, or a daughter, as a woman, as a person who breathes on her own. Today, months later, I can say that I'm okay. Not perfect, not fully figured out, but at peace. I've learned that loving doesn't always mean staying. That letting go is also a form of care. That not all stories need a happy ending to be meaningful. I still see Caleb from time to time. We exchange polite words, catch up on Ian. There's no resentment, just a shared past. Martine remains a great support, but we haven't reopened old doors. Each of us continues on our own path, with respect. And I, finally, have started painting again. My hands tremble at first, but then they flow. In every brushstroke, I find a part of myself I had forgotten. It's my way of healing, of expressing, without words, of rebuilding myself from the inside. This is the last page of this chapter, not of my life, because the story continues, but of a stage that transformed me, that taught me that being true to oneself is not selfishness. It's survival. It's self-love. And it is, too, the greatest act of freedom.